I'm Nick Park from Evangelical Alliance Ireland, and this is our weekly message. It's Friday, but Sunday is coming. And actually it's Saturday, because I am recording this on Saturday and releasing this video on Saturday. The reason being is that today is the fourth Saturday in November. And you might say, well, what's special about that? Well, the fourth Saturday in November is the day for commemoration of the Holodomor. The Holodomor was a dreadful famine that was experienced in the Ukraine in 1932 and 1933. Something we here in Ireland understand about famines and the impact that they can have. We had a great famine ourselves back in the 1840s, and of course it was a man-made famine. There was enough food in Ireland to feed everybody, but because of the actions of a colonial government, there was millions of people lost their lives in the Irish famine, and all these years later it still has a huge impact even on the way we as a people look on things like home ownership and property and stuff like that. And Ukraine has this similar famine, well actually a larger famine in terms of the number of people that died. In 1932 and 1933 it's estimated that between 3.5 and 5 million Ukrainians died of hunger. Holodomor, by the way, means death by hunger. And that was out of a population of about 31 million, so over 10 as high as 17 or 18% of the population died of hunger just in the space of a year, really. And it, as I said, it was a man-made famine, just like our famine here in Ireland, but it was much more recently. There are still people alive today who were alive during the Holodomor. And it was created by the Soviets under Joseph Stalin. Basically, they wanted to punish the Ukrainians because the Ukrainians there was quite a movement in the Ukraine that they didn't want to be part of the Soviet Union. They wanted more independence, more autonomy. There was emphasis on speaking their own language, Ukrainian rather than Russian, etc. And basically, the communist system under Joseph Stalin wanted to take all the grain that was grown in different areas, and in collectivization, it was basically gathered into central points and then distributed where they wanted it to be distributed, which was a very powerful way to try to keep people under the thumb and under your rule, because if they step out of line, you don't allocate them as much food. And so the Ukrainian farmers, which of course was the breadbasket of Europe at the time, were given such high quotas of grain that they had to produce. They were absolutely impossible, and if they didn't produce those quotas of grain, they were fined by taking away their vegetables and everything else they could grow as a punishment. And as a result, you had entire villages dying of starvation, and emigration was not an option because it was forbidden to leave not just Ukraine but often your own region as well. And so this horrific famine took place. As we say, between 3.5 and 5 million Ukrainians died, and today is the internationally recognized as a day of commemoration for the Holodomor on the fourth Saturday every year in November. Amazingly, that was not the biggest tragedy in terms of loss of life that Ukraine has suffered in living memory, because during the Second World War, less than 10 years after the Holodomor, the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union. They originally the Nazis had made a pact with Joseph Stalin, the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, but then that was broken, and the Nazis came through Ukraine. The front line of the Eastern Front of the Second World War swept through Ukraine in one direction and then gradually back again through the other, with massive amounts of deaths. And to add to the 3.5 to 5 million Ukrainians that died in the Holodomor, there were a further 8 million died in World War II. That's over 25% of the population of the country. Truly horrific death rates. Now, some of you may know that I myself, on behalf of Evangelical Alliance, pray daily and release a video prayer praying for Ukraine. I recognize that Ukraine is an imperfect nation. There's still corruption in Ukraine, as there is in every country that was a part of the Soviet Union. There's great corruption in Russia, which is why you can have Russian billionaires able to buy Premier League football clubs, for example. But there's still a lot of problems in Ukraine. But also there's a wonderful church in Ukraine. There's amazing churches in Ukraine. And what we have seen is that Ukraine has become a missionary sending nation. So some of the most powerful church movements across Russia have been led and pastored by Ukrainians. So, as we say, a country with problems, Ukraine, and even before it was invaded, but also an amazing church that's there. And so that's why I pray for Ukraine. I've been to Ukraine many times. My heart is broken for what has been inflicted on my friends in Ukraine and on the church in Ukraine. Sometimes people do send me messages saying, why don't you pray for Russia? Well, I do. I pray for Russia every single day. I've been to Russia many times. I have many wonderful friends in Russia. I've spent many happy times teaching in churches and colleges in Russia and training pastors there. I can't go back now to Russia. I'm not allowed to travel there. But I would say this, that even back when I was able to travel freely both to Ukraine and Russia, what I did find always was that in Ukraine, there was a great freedom and openness to the gospel, and we were given every help and encouragement by government and local government to be able to stage evangelistic events. Whereas in Russia, we were always up against a lot of suspicion and repression and bureaucracy being employed to try and stifle the church. And I am aware that if I was to release regular prayers for Russia like I do for Ukraine, all that would serve to do is to attract unwelcome attention from the authorities on people that have had contact with me in Russia. But I assure you, I do pray every day for Russia, just as I pray every day for Ukraine. There is a war going on. My own personal convictions, this is not an official position of Evangelical Alliance, but my own personal position as a Christian is I am a pacifist. I don't believe in war. There are several things I would die for. I'd be prepared to die for Christ, and I'd be prepared to die for my family, but I can't imagine a situation where I would ever want to kill somebody else for any cause whatsoever. So I'm not rejoicing over what happens in a war. If Ukraine, for example, launch an attack and kill thousands of Russian soldiers, I don't say this is wonderful. I grieve for those that have lost their lives. I grieve for broken-hearted families who have lost their sons, many of them Christian families, and often those sons were conscripted into the Russian army and had no desire to fight in that war. So I'm broken-hearted at all the loss of life that is occurring in the war in Ukraine. I would love to see that war stop. I've been around long enough and I know enough history to know that if you just surrender to dictators, that generally just encourages them to wage more wars. And so there needs to be a just peace in Ukraine, and I pray for that every single day. But today, on the fourth Saturday of November, I'm praying for the Ukrainian people. I'm praying for the Ukrainian nation. I'm praying particularly for the Ukrainian church. And I would ask you to do the same today. It's commemoration of that awful event of the Holodomor, which is really, together with all those deaths in World War II, have placed a great burden on the soul of the Ukrainian people. And we need to pray for them today. And as a Christian, irrespective of the nationality that I hold and irrespective of my own political opinions, I count it a privilege to be able to pray for the Ukrainian people on this special day that marks a time of suffering that they went through, which was very similar to an earlier time of suffering that we went through in Ireland. These are indeed difficult days for a lot of people, but I still believe that better days lie ahead, because it might be Friday, but Sunday is coming.